But across the board, I just have this strange sense that this weekend's going to provide a little bit of drama. Hello and welcome. It's always college football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy, and we appreciate you being here. It is Halloween. So for those of you that are anxiously awaiting your doorbell being pressed and little kids coming up to the door, we hope that this is on your YouTube channel in your living room as we prepare you for what should be an incredible weekend of college football, wherever it is you're getting the show, whether it's on podcast platform, on Apple, on Spotify. We appreciate those of you that have gone out of your way to rate the show, to subscribe to the show. Our numbers from a podcast standpoint are through the roof. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate it. I mean, we love talking college football with y'all, and we appreciate your ownership that you've taken in the show. We don't have some presented by sponsor. We don't have big pockets. I look at all these podcasts that are in the top 30, like paying for the placement or whatever. It's always presented by some gigantic conglomerate. We don't have that. We just love talking ball with you guys. You guys are our grassroots campaign, and we're grateful very much to the support that you've shown the show. We have a lot of great games to look forward to this weekend. We got some big ones in the ACC, a couple big ones in the SEC, and an enormous one in the Big Ten. So let's dive into some of these incredible matchups by kicking things off in State College, where Ohio State will take on the Penn State Nittany Lions. The fourth-ranked Ohio State Buckeyes will take on the third-ranked Penn State Nittany Lions. Ohio State is about a 3.5, 4-point favorite. The total is just under 49, so somewhere in the vicinity of 48, 48.5, 47.5, around there. All right, Saturday, noon Eastern time on Fox. This will be the 18th top 5 matchup all time for the Nittany Lions. Their record in those matchups is 6-10-1 in the 17 leading up. Their last win in a top 5 matchup came in 1999. That was against Arizona. So a big opportunity for James Franklin and an enormous opportunity for Penn State. Let's start with question number 1. Who will get the go at quarterback for Penn State? Now, Drew Aller, he injured his left knee in the second quarter against Wisconsin. He's been said at this point to be a, quote, game time decision, which shouldn't everybody be a game time decision, right? I mean, we always use these designations, and whether a guy can go or not go, like, isn't it kind of always at the buzzer, like how a guy is feeling, whether or not he can go? Like, if I come down with a stomach bug, does that make me a game time decision? That absolutely does. So game time decision right now for Aller because of the knee. But I do think, let's just be honest, I think he's probably going to go, but we'll see. All right, we'll see. If he can't, Bo Pribula, who did a really good job in the second half of the football game last week. I mean, went in, was efficient throwing the football. He's always been a gadget player, a guy that's been used within the offense, but now not just in that little package. They're now using him kind of in the entire offense, and I thought he threw the ball pretty well. Now, these two guys, depending on who's under center or in shotgun for the Nittany Lions, the offense changes drastically. When it's Aller, it's a little more predictable. I think he's underrated from a mobility standpoint, but Pribula is really a runner that has now developed into becoming a pretty good passer, whereas Aller is more of a passer that can keep you honest at times with his legs. The good news for Penn State is that their offensive coordinator, Andy Kotelnicki, who they paid the big bucks to bring him over from Kansas, he's gone through this before. This is not new for Andy Kotelnicki. And if you remember what Kansas has gone through the last couple of years from a quarterback standpoint, they've had challenges with keeping guys healthy, with guys in and out of the lineup. You think a guy's going to go, and then boom, he can't at the last minute. For instance, last year at Kansas, Andy Kotelnicki and company, they prepped all week leading into their game against Texas, their biggest game on the schedule, at least up to that point. Biggest game of the week for them. Jalen Daniels was their starting quarterback, and then boom, in warm-ups or in the pregame, Jalen Daniels hurts his back. Well, hey, in goes Jason Bean. They also kind of sat there wondering all season long if Jalen Daniels would be able to return. So Jason Bean was kind of left in limbo and didn't really know week to week if he was going to have to play, start, play in a role, play situationally, what have you. So this is not new for Andy Kotelnicki, and I think his experience having gone through what he went through last year at Kansas will better prepare him and the offense to succeed this weekend. Like I said, I anticipate Drew Aller playing. I think it's likely. And at the end of the day, does it matter? That's the real question. Does it matter? Because the athletic component that Pribula brings to the table could be pretty interesting in this matchup. Either way, I think Penn State is in good hands at the quarterback position. Would rather have the experience of Aller for sure, but the athleticism of Pribula does make things a little bit different for how Ohio State's defense might approach the game. Question number 2, can Penn State get off to a fast start? Now, they've scored 24 first quarter points. They haven't scored very many, however, in the last few weeks. It's a little bit of a feeling out process, especially in a game like this. We know the home field advantage in a game like this is massive, okay? It's a little better when it's not at noon. If this game were at night in the traditional whiteout game, people would be literally jumping out of the stands. It'd be absolutely outrageously insane. A noon game, I do think, helps the away team just a little bit because you kind of just wake up and you go. And it doesn't allow the fans in the stands to kind of work themselves into a frenzy over the course of a 12-game pregame, right? The fans will be well hydrated, but maybe not as hydrated if the game kicked off at 6:30. Not because they won't try, it's because you just don't have that much time. All right, you catch my drift there? You catching my drift? I've done a whiteout game. It's something, all right? It's awesome. It's a great experience. I wish this game was a whiteout, but it is what it is, all right? However, I got down a rabbit hole there. I apologize. Let's get back to the actual ball, all right? If you look at the first quarter of football games for Penn State, there is this conservative approach offensively that is a little bit unique. They basically look at it, they say, we don't want to lose the game in the first quarter. Let's just kind of feel it out. Let's see how teams are playing us defensively, and let's just work our way into the plan. You know how many downfield throws they've attempted in the first quarter this season? And we qualify downfield throws as throws that travel 20-plus yards. You know how many they've tried? Zero. Downfield throws attempted by Penn State in the first quarter of their 7 football games this season. Now, after the first quarter, the whole world opens up and they start to get aggressive and they start to become a little bit more willing to take chances. So I think against Ohio State, especially with the crowd behind you, it's imperative for Penn State to get off to a really fast start, because if Ohio State starts fast, you know what Penn State's going to be thinking? Oh, here we go again. Question number 3. Can Ohio State get their offensive line figured out? Now, throughout the offseason, there has been so much talk about Ohio State's roster and their ability to attract premier players, whether it be by way of the portal or high school recruiting ranks. I think you look at their roster from top to bottom, you could make a case it's the strongest roster in the United States. You could. Maybe if you exclude NFL teams, which, and there might even be, the Panthers. I'm not sure they have as much talent as the Ohio State Buckeyes, but I digress. All right. Looking at what they've done from a roster standpoint, every position group is just lights out as far as guys that will eventually play on Sundays. Now, will some become Pro Bowlers, all pros? I don't know, but they got a lot of pros on that roster. Their starting 22 is littered with future pros. The one area, though, that's a significant problem is the offensive line. And if you look at their offensive line recruiting, just 2 high school offensive linemen that they've recruited that ranked in the top 100 nationally. Both those players, Donovan Jackson, their left guard, might be left tackle this year, and Tegra Shabola, those guys are both starting for Ohio State, but neither have kind of lived up to the top 100 billing so far. Made one addition in the transfer portal. That was the center from Alabama, Seth McLaughlin. When they lost their left tackle against Oregon, that was Josh Simmons, the backup situation was a problem. They go to Zen Michalski, a guy that had been playing college football for 4 years but hadn't really played much on the offensive line. Well, he clearly wasn't the answer. gave up a couple sacks, gave up a couple pressures. He gets hurt in the fourth quarter. When Michalski left the game, they moved their left guard to left tackle, and then you stick sophomore Luke Montgomery in there at left guard. Well, I don't know what they're going to go with as far as their starting lineup. All I know is whoever's in there better be ready to play against a high caliber group along the defensive line, because we know Abdul Carter, we know who he is, and we better know where he's at all times. And if I'm Penn State and I'm looking at this Ohio State offensive line, Abdul Carter's working the left tackle all game long. And then if Dani Dennis Sutton can go, then it makes things even more difficult to be able to block this group. All right, question number 4. If Ohio State can't run the ball, can Will Howard win the game? They had just 141 rushing yards against the Ducks. They could not move the ball very well against Nebraska. Season low 64 rushing yards between Judkins and Travion Henderson. Not what you're looking for. All right, 20 carries to account for just 2+ yards per carry. Not good enough. Now, Quinshon Judkins did catch a touchdown, but the running game has not been great. And they're going against a great group. Penn State's 8th against the run. They allow 93 yards a game. They're 13th in yards per carry. This is a really good group against the run. And Will Howard's been good this year. And to be honest with you, I think he's a touch underrated. He's 5th in EPA per drop back. And 2 of the 4 in front of him play at the academies in Bryson Daly and Blake Horvath. So they don't drop back quite as often. The other 2 that are in front of him are Curtis Rourke at Indiana, who's playing out of his mind, and the Heisman frontrunner Cam Ward. So I think Will Howard's really underrated. And last week, he was pretty dang efficient. 81% of his passes, 221 and 3 touchdowns. Did have a bad pick on the overthrow, and they have elite weapons as well. And Jeremiah Smith, he could be the key to breaking this game open. Because if you look at how Ohio State has played against Penn State the last 2 years, guess who took that game over? That was Marvin Harrison. In 2022 and 2023, Marvin Harrison had 21 catches for 347 and a touchdown. Double-digit catches in both games. It's the only 2 times he ever went in double digits in his Ohio State career. And 19 of his 21 catches against Penn State resulted in either a first down or a touchdown. So Ohio State has had that receiver take the game over. Maybe this year it's Jeremiah Smith. And then finally, Jim Knowles, will he begin to ramp up the variety that he was always famous for, right? Ohio State has constantly said that they need their front 4 to bring pressure. But if you look last week, Ohio State had 3 sacks in the game. All 3 came when Jim Knowles decided to ramp up the pressures. Now, they've put this pass rush package on the field multiple times. And guys, it's just not very effective. JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer are great run defenders. I think they're okay rushing the passer. They're not crazy twitchy. And then Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson on the inside. Like this is not a very effective pass rushing unit. I just look at kind of where things are, and I look at how Jim Knowles has kind of made his name in the sport, and he's looking at his roster saying, man, I got great players here. Like, I might not have to do as much because I got great players that can create their own shot in the pass rush. Well, it hasn't been super effective. So maybe he needs to ramp things up pressure-wise. Well, guess what? Against Nebraska, the blitz rate was 49%. That was nearly double what they did against Oregon the week before. They were 25% against Oregon. When you remove the Nebraska game, their blitz rate this season was 22%. Last year it was 22, and in 2022 it was 24. So we'll see if they decide to ramp that pressure up again this week against an offensive line that I think is pretty solid and a group that I do think can create some question marks. There's so many different I could spend an hour breaking this game down, by the way. Like, I haven't even talked hardly at all about Penn State's passing attack and whether or not they can take advantage of a questionable secondary, because I don't know who the quarterback's going to be. But I do know this. I know when I watch that Oregon tape, I look at them going after Denzel Burke, Davidson Igbinosun, and I look at they kind of find some success. Now, things looked a little better against Nebraska, but that was because Nebraska ran like 70 million screens throughout the game. It was all horizontal. So Igbinosun had a few penalties in the game, by the way, too. So I didn't even break that down because I just don't know who's going to be playing quarterback for the Nittany Lions. So that's a question that I wish we could address. We just won't have time because we just won't know until that game kicks off. A couple trends in the game. Over the last 5 years, AP top 5 teams as home dogs are 3-0 against the spread. They are also 3-0 outright. Penn State is 7-3 against the spread against Ohio State under James Franklin. However, he is 1-9 straight up. I'm taking the bait. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good at all. I think this is going to be a super low-scoring affair. I think it's going to be a Big Ten clash where physicality is of the utmost importance, where line of scrimmage play determines who wins and loses. And right now, I think there's a decided advantage along the line of scrimmage in favor of Penn State. I'm taking Penn State. And like I said, it feels terrible to say those words out loud, and I'll probably be eating some crow come Sunday, but I got to go with what I've seen so far. And right now, Ohio State's offensive line is just too big of a concern for me to overlook. Florida is against Georgia, Jacksonville. We will not call it the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Okay, we will just that one time, but we won't say it again. Okay, don't worry. Promise. ABC 3:30. Georgia is about a 16.5-point favorite. The total is just north of 50. The Bulldogs have won 3 straight and 6 of their past 7 against the Florida Gators. Georgia is looking to win 4 straight against the Gators for the first time since a 6-game win streak from 1978 through 1983. And hey, just so you know, the Gators, they've been playing better football, by the way, but now things are about to ramp up to a whole new level. Because if you look at what they have down the stretch as far as their schedule, it doesn't get much easier. All right, they have played Tennessee, but now you have a stretch that includes Texas, includes Georgia, you got Ole Miss. Things get tough here from this point forward for Billy Napier and the Gators, but they are an improved bunch. Let's go to question number 1. And how many times have we asked this question? Can Carson Beck get back on track this week? All right. Here's the good news. He's coming out of the bye week. Okay. And last year, heading into the bye week, Georgia had started to become a little bit more pass happy, a little bit too pass happy, if I'm going to be completely honest. Now, they were banged up at running back last year. That was a huge problem. Remember, they had guys that were in and out of the lineup. At one point, they had to move a receiver to running back. They didn't have enough bodies to run the ball as much as they probably would have liked, which led to Carson Beck attempting 30-plus passes in every game prior to the bye week. He averaged 33.3 attempts per game in those 7 games. Well, after the bye week, they got a little healthier, and they reevaluated what they wanted their offense to be. He, as a result, averaged 26 passing attempts down the stretch. So 33.5 in the first 7 games, 26 attempts a game in the last 7. They took some of the pressure off of him. They became a little more committed to the run game. Another thing that was a big difference before and after the bye week is that last year, in the first 7 games, he threw 4 picks. But in the 3 games leading up to the bye, those last 3 games, he threw 1 interception in each of those 3 games heading into the off week. The final 7, he was lights out from a decision-making standpoint, just 2 picks after the bye week in 2023. So far, it's been a different guy. He's thrown 8 picks this year. But if we're going to look a little beyond it, he's thrown 5 in the last 2 weeks, and all 8 have come in the last 4 games. The only game in which he did not throw an interception was against Auburn. So maybe that bye week came at the perfect time. And if you look at where it was last year, how he played before and then how he played after, you saw a very different guy. And he's going against a secondary that is going to allow you to kind of get back on track. If you look at Florida, their biggest question mark perhaps might be the secondary. Now, outside of a lights-out performance against Samford, not Stanford, Samford, the group has struggled. We saw them get torched by Miami, and that is by far the best passing attack that the Gators have seen this year. This will be the second best. So we will see where things can go from there. Question number 2. Can Florida stay committed to the rushing attack? Because this is going to be a very interesting approach for Florida. It's pretty obvious based on how things went against Kentucky. This is a big play offense. They want to create big plays. They want to push the ball down the field. They want to manufacture play action and misdirection and allow time for those guys to take off, get behind the defense, and Lagway to drop it in the basket. But the only way you're really going to get favorable looks to take shots downfield is if you stay committed to the run game. And I do think, too, while they want to create big plays, I also think shrinking the game is going to be beneficial for Florida. They're going to need to muddy it up a little bit. They're going to have some time-consuming, time of possession, clock-managing drives. And if they can do that, they can shrink the game and not allow the talent gap, not allow the experience gap, not allow the depth gap to come to the forefront as easily. So can Florida stay committed to the run game without trying to get too aggressive offensively? Question 3, can Georgia find some balance offensively? Because if you look at Carson Beck's struggles, I think part of it is because they're probably a little bit too pass happy. Another part of it is they haven't been able to effectively run the football the way we thought they'd be able to coming into the season. Now, part of that is because the offensive line has been dealing with some injuries. They've been without 2 starters. They also have a couple other guys that have stayed in the lineup but have been super banged up. And the run game just hasn't taken off the way we thought it might. And now, guess who's playing running back for Georgia? That would be a young man by the name of ETN. He is formerly of the Florida Gators. So can they get ETN going in a game against his former team? That will be interesting as well. And when he gets going, that's going to open things up a lot for Carson Beck off play action. Because I know there's probably a little distrust with the offensive line. I think that's something that you got to probably monitor moving forward. I'm not sure Carson's always comfortable when he's dropping back. But one thing that has been consistent this year is how effective Carson Beck has been off play action. He has a QBR of 85.7 off play action. Remember, that's a scale from 1 to 100. So when you're up, mid to high 80s, that's pretty sporty. So QBR is 85.7 off play action. But when he's in standard drop back and there is no run fake involved, that QBR drops by nearly 30 points, down to 59.1. So something worth watching. If they can get the run game going, the play action game will get going, and then maybe as a result, Carson Beck can get going. I referenced it already. It's question number 4. Can Florida hit some big explosive plays? Now, Florida has had 7 plays from scrimmage that have gone for 50-plus yards. That's 7th in the SEC. They have 3 plays of 60-plus yards. That's 4th. They have 3 plays of 70-plus yards. That's 1st. And they have 1 play that went for 80-plus yards. This is a big play offense. That's what they've now become with DJ Lagway under center. And against Kentucky, Lagway had one of the more remarkable box scores I think I've ever seen. He completed just 7 passes. But those 7 passes, all 7 went for at least 20 yards. 5 went for at least 40 yards. And those 7 passes led to 259 yards through the air. Okay. That's pretty good as far as yards per completion is concerned. When you're somewhere in the middle, 35 yards per completion, I'd say that's pretty good. These receivers have been pretty good as well. You have the transfer Elijah Badger from Arizona State. You have the Wisconsin transfer Chimere Dike, who's been really solid as well. And they've been without their top guy, Eugene Wilson, who did miss some time with injury. He did come back against Tennessee, but had just 1 catch. It did go for 40 yards, though. So this isn't an explosive offense that can create plays downfield. The problem with having your identity rooted in explosive plays is you better be able to block them. And Mykel Williams and Jalen Walker, that tandem, as they proved against the Texas Longhorns, those guys can take over the game. They can absolutely take over the game. So you better be able to block them to allow those receivers to uncover downfield, because if you can't block them, the play's dead before it starts. The one thing I do think you can do, though, I do think you can take advantage of the secondary. Like I said, you got to be able to block them, but this secondary is not always as good as it was in years past. They lost 3 incredible players off last year's team. Kamari Lassiter, Tyke Smith, Javon Bullard. Those 3 are all starting in the NFL. None were first-round picks, but they were great football players. They still have Malachi Starks, but the others have been a little up and down at times this year. Janelle Aguero, Dan Jackson, they're going to miss a little time in this game because of targeting calls. And while Texas, they were not going to be the type of team that could challenge them. When you look at Texas and their offense, I mean, a vast majority of their offense comes within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. But those that have challenged Georgia downfield have found some success. They've allowed 7 completions on balls thrown 30 yards downfield. That's tied for the most in the SEC. A couple trends in the game. Florida has covered 4 straight after starting the season 0-3 against the spread. That's the longest active cover streak in the SEC. And Georgia's 0-5 against the spread in their last 5 games as favorite. That is tied for the largest active against the spread losing streak among Power 4 teams behind TCU. I'm taking Georgia, but 16.5 is too many. I'm thinking like a 31-17 type of game. I think Florida will hit a couple big plays, and I think they'll be able to control the clock a little bit. But Carson Beck and company, they're going to feast on a secondary that has been challenged at times this year. Texas A&M will travel to Columbia, South Carolina. A&M is a narrow 2.5-point favorite. The total in this game is about 45. This game will be Saturday, 7:30 Eastern time on ABC. This is the 11th meeting between these two teams. They met for the first time back in 2014. A&M has won 9 of the previous 10. Their lone loss in the matchup is in 2022. That was at South Carolina. So the last time to Willie Bryce resulted in an L for the Aggies. One thing of note here, South Carolina has been a team. They're coming out of the bye week this week. This game will be played in November. South Carolina has been a team that's played their best football under Shane Beamer later in the season. Not great in August, September, and October, but in November, we've seen them be a completely different outfit. Just like we saw a couple years ago, the team in 2022 that beat Tennessee, the team in 2022 that beat Clemson. Against Power 4 competition in August, September, and October, they are 6-16. That's right. You heard that right. 6-16 in August, September, and October. But under Shane Beamer, the Gamecocks are 7-4 against Power 4 teams in November. So clearly, they peak as the season moves a little bit forward. Question number 1. Who ends up starting at quarterback for Texas A&M? Will it be Connor Wigman or will it be Marcel Reed? Now, 2 very different skill sets. Wigman gets the start last week, gets the hook midway through the third quarter. He wasn't seeing the field very well. He wasn't very accurate. Some of the throws he did throw accurately were thrown with way too much pace. I mean, just right off receivers and running backs' chests. But he threw him 1,000 miles an hour from 7 yards away. He just clearly looked very uncomfortable. And the pass rush from LSU was having an effect on him. As a result, I think he completed like 6 out of his 18 passes. They put Marcel Reed in the game. And well, I think a lot of people looked at Marcel Reed he put a lot of jolt into the offense. All that is true. He also was afforded the benefit of unbelievable field position in most of the drives that he was on the field. So Marcel Reed was put in really good situations, but it was hard to ignore just how much more efficient the offense operated with Reed at the quarterback spot. I think it's going to be Marcel Reed. I'm not sure anybody knows for sure. And if I were Mike Elko, I wouldn't tell anybody. What do you stand to gain by telling them, yeah, we're going to go with the drop back quarterback or we're going to go with the quarterback that really has the run element? How would you give them the answers to the test? Make them prepare for both, and then we'll find out on Saturday who gets the start. Like I said, expect it to be Marcel Reed. South Carolina, by the way, they have struggled a little bit on designed quarterback run. They have been really good on defense. I mean, really, really good on defense. But this would be a stat that would probably lead me to think about maybe going with Reed. South Carolina is allowing 4.7 yards per carry on designed quarterback runs this year. That's the second worst in the SEC, trailing only LSU, who gives up over 6 yards per carry. And LSU, of course, struggled last week when playing against Marcel Reed. So I anticipated being Reed, but nothing would surprise me. It is a super hostile road game in the SEC, so maybe going with the veteran gives you a little bit more stability there. I don't know. Either way, that's something that we absolutely have to get answered early in the game. Question number 2. Can Texas A&M run the football? I think we know the answer to that, right? It's just, can they do it against this defensive front? Now, we know Texas A&M wants to just pound the football between the tackles. And that's who they are. That's what they've become. Whether it's Reed at quarterback, whether it's Connor Wigman at quarterback. We spent a lot of time talking about the quarterback situation, but this offense and their MVP this season is Le'Veon Moss. And the way he gets downhill, the way guys just bounce off him, when you watch Le'Veon Moss, the guy just runs angry. And you can't bring him down. And I'm watching LSU, a group that has guys that will play on Sundays on their defense, and they're just bouncing off the running back. It's amazing. And there's a reason why Le'Veon Moss is in the top 15 of ball carriers nationally in yards after contact. He averages 4 yards per carry after contact. The guy is just really difficult to bring down. And then, hey, just when he gets tired, hey, in goes Amari Daniels, and now you got to stop a guy that is now 5'9", 215, who's also extremely tough and is really shifty with great open field speed. Now, we know South Carolina is a super athletic defense. Like, their edges of their defense, those 2 defensive ends, Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard, those guys are so athletic. They can run, they can close. And if you try to win on the perimeter against them, you're going to have a really hard time. But let's just be real. Running it outside the tackles against South Carolina is probably not a recipe for long-term success. They're really good in the alleys. They have safeties that are all 210, 215 pounds that'll come up and hit you. And they have defensive ends that can flat out fly. So you're probably going to have to try to attack South Carolina right up the middle. And I don't know if you can, because they have defensive tackles who, while all the attention goes to their ends, understandably so, their defensive tackles and their linebackers are a really underrated group. Really underrated. So can A&M run the football with the same type of success that they were able to run the football against LSU? I think they ran for 240 in that game, and that obviously gave them the win. Question number 3, can the Gamecocks neutralize what I think is the best defensive line in the country? South Carolina's offensive line has at times been a little bit vulnerable. They have a young left tackle that's a true freshman, and he's going to be going against Nick Scorton. He's going to be going against Shamar Stewart and Shamar Turner. These are 3 guys along the Aggie defensive line that are take over the game as good as anybody in college football at their position. They are amazing. And wow, hey, here's the good news. South Carolina's got a pretty good defense that Lenore Sellers and that offensive line go against every day. So they're probably not going to be surprised by the athleticism because they see it every day in practice. But on the interior, these defensive tackles are incredible. And Mike Elko does a really good job of scheming things up. And Mike Elko does a really good job of bringing pressures, and they are able to kind of change things week to week. So that's going to be really interesting. And if you look at Lenore Sellers, his numbers under pressure have not been great. When he gets pressure, he is a young quarterback. He does not do a great job of beating the pressure with his arm. He tries to beat it with athleticism, and that's led to 32 sacks this year. South Carolina has given up 32 sacks. That's the second most in college football behind Oklahoma. Okay. They also have 13 sacks on third down. So if they get into third and long situations, that could be really difficult to contain this defensive line as well. So very, very curious to see how Dowell Loggins, the offensive coordinator for South Carolina, how he tries to attack this group along the defensive front. It should be amazing. It's going to be a great matchup. And then final question here. Does either passing attack scare you? I really am just flat out curious. You guys have watched the games just like I have. I look at South Carolina's passing attack, and I look at their inconsistencies that they've had at times at wide receiver. I think they have some good wideouts. Like I think Mazio Bennett's a really good slot receiver. I think Jared Brown, if he can get back and if he can be healthy, he can be a good, solid catch and run option. I think Nick Harbor's got tons of God-given ability, but the consistency and the refined route running is not there all the time. I think they have good tight ends. I look at the receivers for A&M at the same time. I think, all right, Noah Thomas, we've got a lot of length. He's 6'6". I think they have a couple of solid guys in the slot that can do some nice things. But, man, I think these two offenses are pretty similar. I mean, they really are. They're pretty similar. Now, I think A&M's offensive line is playing at a higher level than what we've seen from South Carolina's offensive line, but both have super physical running backs. Both have quarterbacks, assuming Marcel Reed is playing for the Aggies. Both have quarterbacks that can really break you down with their legs. Both have receiver cores that have shown at times to be really good, and then at times to be somewhat inconsistent, and at times will sometimes disappear. Both have pretty physical and underrated tight ends. I just think these two offenses are very, very similar, and this thing could come down to who plays better and who avoids the critical mistake. I'll be on the call alongside Sean McDonough and Molly McGrath, so we look forward to having you alongside us at 7:30 Eastern Time on ABC. Also in the night slate, ranked matchup on the ACC network. Pitt will travel to Dallas in an old school ACC slugfest. I always say that tongue in cheek. It's just funny as a kid from Dallas to think about SMU being in the ACC is just still uncomfortable for me. And I'll probably make fun of it for like 2 more years and then I'll get over it. I still think it's a great addition, and SMU has been amazing. It just, as a kid from Dallas, I never thought about us, wearing our suits and boots. I never thought about us fitting in the ACC, but I digress. SMU, they're in position to maybe get to the ACC title game right now, undefeated in the conference in their first year. But Pitt, what a bounce back season from Pat Narduzzi. Such a disappointing 2023 campaign. Fast forward to this year, they're 7-0 for the first time since 1982. That was when Dan Marino was at the helm. They were number 1 in the AP poll that year. But here's the bad news. Pitt did lose that 8th game that year to an unranked Notre Dame team. So they're looking to start 8-0 for the first time since winning their first 10 back in 81. So it's been a while since Pitt's been in thin air like this, but looks to be pretty real. It really does. Let's start with question number 1. And this has been a theme all week, right? Quarterback injuries, whether it's Penn State, maybe quarterback injuries or quarterback indecision. Like A&M's got indecision. And then you got this situation with Pitt, Eli Holstein. Now, Pat Narduzzi was asked about it, about the health of Holstein, who, by the way, he went out of the game on his own accord, hit his head, didn't complete the game, pulled himself out, walked to the metal tent, walked to the locker room. But he's been really good for him all year. I mean, he's thrown for over 1,800 yards, got 17 touchdowns. And if you look at just how he's performed in the non-conference, maybe coming back to earth just a hair. He was 12-2 touchdown interception ratio in the non-conference. Not quite as efficient right now. He's 5-3 on TD to INT and just 207 yards a game. But there have been times where he's thrown into some traffic. And that's something that's worth monitoring in this situation. If Eli Holstein can go. If he can't go, it sounds like Nate Yarnell will get a lot of the first team reps this week, and they'll assess as they get a little bit closer. One thing worth noting, Holstein has struggled at times under pressure this year. But Pitt is going to give up a lot of pressure. That's just kind of where they're at. And then SMU on the other side, they have one of the highest pressure rates in the country. So if SMU can pressure the quarterback and stop the run, that could be a huge problem for Pitt's offense as far as consistently moving the chains. Question 2, can Kevin Jennings take advantage of a secondary coming off a historically dominant performance? Now, here's one area where Kevin Jennings is very, very different from Kyle McCord. Kyle McCord's going to live in the pocket. Kevin Jennings can break you down with his legs. And SMU's offense, they got tons of RPOs. This is something, by the way, that Pat Narduzzi's prepared against. Rhett Lashley has faced Pat Narduzzi in the past. He was at one point the offensive coordinator at Miami. So this is going to require great discipline at the second level for Pitt because of all the different things that Rhett Lashley can do to cause confusion defensively. And when he doesn't cause confusion, he can just hand it to Brashard Smith, who's 3rd in the ACC with 750 rushing yards and 2nd in the conference with 9 rushing touchdowns. The good news is Pitt's great against the defense. They're always great against the defense. All Pat Narduzzi coach defenses are going to be great against the run. 94 rushing yards a game given up this year. That's the 9th fewest in the FBS. And if you look at how Kevin Jennings made mistakes last week, and we'll talk about the turnovers here in a second, Kevin Jennings has feasted on teams that ramp up the pressure. The more you blitz, the more he breaks you down. Well, Manny Diaz last week, who was the head coach at Duke and the team that led to those 6 SMU turnovers, he kind of forced SMU to be patient. He kind of stayed back. He didn't overload the pressure. He didn't ramp it up as much. And you could tell that SMU, without their top target, RJ Maryland, kind of struggled to manufacture the big plays. They got frustrated and they made big mistakes. This Pitt defense, if you don't know about their linebackers, watch this game. Kyle Lewis, Rasheem Biles, these guys are awesome, man. And they're going to be put on a pedestal this week trying to slow down this RPO-based offensive attack. Question number 3. Do you know anything about SMU's defense? No. SMU's defense is actually a lot like Pitt's. They're kind of similar. They're relatively simple. They don't do a ton of intriguing things. They kind of know what you're going to get. And they're great against the run. They're 5th right now in rush defense. And they're a group that can really penetrate and create problems. So they're a simple defense that operates and executes at a pretty high level. And I think Pat Narduzzi, if you were to ask him, hey, what do you think of this SMU defense? I think he'd probably tell you that he likes them because they remind me a lot of a Pat Narduzzi coach team that we've seen in the past. And then question number 4, does this game simply come down to turnovers? 2 teams that had very interesting outcomes last week as it relates to turnovers. SMU was -6 in the turnover margin last week and still won the game. I read somewhere that this was only the 2nd team to ever win with a -6 turnover margin, which I'm not sure how you do. Well, I know how you do it. You make sure they miss a 42-yard field goal at the buzzer. You block a 30-yard field goal. Like, I know how they did it, but it's still pretty remarkable that they sat there -6 and won the football game. Meanwhile, on the other side, Pitt forced 5 interceptions and 3 pick sixes. All of those pick sixes came in the first half. It was the first time that's happened in a college football game since FIU did it in 2005. Trend in the game, Pitt has covered 6 straight cover losses as a road underdog. That's tied for the longest active streak in the FBS, and SMU is 20-9 as a home favorite since 2019. I'll take SMU. I think last week was the anomaly performance. They'll have a big bounce back, and they'll win this game comfortably. Duke is at Miami. Miami is a 3-touchdown favorite. This game's Saturday, noon Eastern time on ABC. Manny Diaz makes his return to Miami, where he was the head coach from 2019 to 2021. He was 21-15 in his 3 years with the Hurricanes. This will be the most difficult game remaining on Miami's schedule. So Miami needs to be careful. Okay, we know that Cam Ward is an amazing talent. He's so much fun to watch. He's great at quarterback, but he is not immune to turning the ball over. He needs to be super careful right here. Because while I appreciate his willingness to try it, I would recommend maybe the conservative approach against a Duke defense that has 19 takeaways this year. Malik Murphy on the other side, he's a guy that's been pretty good, pretty efficient. I think he's a solid passer. Doesn't offer much in the run game, but this game for Duke could come down to their third down offense. They convert just 30% of their third downs. That is 127, which is pretty wild, especially considering the fact that their average third down distance is 6.5 yards, which is 29th. So in a roundabout way, they're like 29th on first and second down and 127th on third down. So if they can't get that sorted out, that's going to be a problem. But if they turn Miami over, this thing could be more interesting than you'd like if you are a Hurricane fan. Duke has covered in 6 straight games as an underdog. That is tied for the longest active streak in the FBS with Vanderbilt, Northern Illinois, and BYU. I'm taking Miami, but 21 points is too many. I think Duke can turn them over a couple times. Wouldn't be shocked if this is a game in the fourth quarter. I think it has a chance to be if Duke can force a couple turnovers. Ole Miss is on the road at Arkansas. Ole Miss is about a touchdown favorite right now. This is Saturday, noon Eastern time on ESPN. Ole Miss better be careful here. Arkansas is a rock-solid football team, and there is this big game on the schedule for the Rebels next week. It's a home game against Georgia, and all offseason, Lane Kiffin and company have talked about, hey, we have improved our roster. We're better in the trenches so that when we get the chance to play against Georgia, if we get the chance to play against Alabama, the results might be different because of the way we look on the interior. So when Lane Kiffin's circling games in the preseason, you know his team they need to be careful at Arkansas. It's a good football team. If Taylon Green doesn't turn it over, they can beat anybody. Now, Ole Miss's offensive line has been a huge problem. Statistically, they're among the worst as far as pressure allowed, as far as quarterback hits allowed. And the biggest part, I think, about this game is not so much about Ole Miss's offensive line and Arkansas's ability to pressure the quarterback, because I think that's a part of the game I think Arkansas can win and neutralize. But what I am curious about is when Arkansas's offense is going against Ole Miss's defense, because Arkansas's offense is all about running the football. And they're set up to run the football and then play action, hit big shots downfield. Now, Jaquindon Jackson's been awesome, but he's banged up. Not even 100% sure if he's going to be able to go. Probably won't be able to go. But Taylon Green is still super effective with his legs. He's got 514 rushing yards when you remove sack yardage. So going against number one rush defense in the FBS, Ole Miss gives up 77 yards a game. So it's good on good. That, I think, will decide the game. Trends in the game. Arkansas is 10-1 against the spread against Ole Miss since 2013. They have 7 straight games that have gone under the total. Ole Miss has. That's the longest active streak in the FBS. I'll take Ole Miss, but 7's too many. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game. I think both defenses will play well in this game, and I don't really trust Ole Miss's offense very much right now. The number one team in the country, the Oregon Ducks, are on the road at the defending national champions. It's the Michigan Wolverines. The Ducks are a 14.5-point favorite, maybe just north of that with where things have gone. This game will be Saturday, 3:30 Eastern time on CBS. Michigan's offense has been one of the stories of the college football season. Davis Warren to Alex Orji to Jack Tuttle, back to Davis Warren. And Davis Warren came off of maybe his best game of the season this year by a Michigan quarterback. He threw for 120, which tells you where that part of Michigan's team is. Michigan has to run the football. They got to run the football. They got to hit Colston Loveland 7 times in the game. And they probably got to execute a trick play or two to make things interesting. They weren't afraid to go into their bag of tricks last week, and it did have some success. But a bottom 5 passing attack, you're not going to beat Oregon if you're super one-dimensional. Oregon, on the other hand, it's really going to be, I think, more about their offense. And now, I think they're good at tackle. I think they're elite at wide receiver. I think they're great at running back. I think they're great at quarterback. I think guard to guard is where I would maybe be the tiniest bit concerned. But it's not so much about where Oregon is. It's about what Michigan is. I look at Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, and those two guys, they can take over the game. So if Michigan wants to make this game interesting, they better be able to pressure Dylan Gabriel right up the middle. And they also better stay on top of these Oregon wide receivers that are going to potentially take the top off the defense. Now, I think Gabriel will have to dink and dunk, and then maybe Michigan gets a little greedy and he hits him over the head. But Gabriel can't help himself, man. He's going to throw it downfield. All right. And maybe he gets the tiniest bit impatient, but how many points will he need to score to win this game? 17, 24, 31? I don't know. All I know is this: Oregon's 9-2 against the spread as a road favorite since 2022. That's the second best in the FBS. And Michigan, just so you know, this would be their second largest home underdog role since 1978. They were a 16.5-point dog against Ohio State in 2013. They lost that game against the Buckeyes 42-41. I'm taking Oregon, but I'd take the points here. I expect it to be kind of a low-scoring affair. I would not be surprised if Michigan's defense plays really well in the game, forces Oregon to be patient, and Oregon maybe has a lackluster offensive performance, but it's because the only way I think Michigan can win the game is if Oregon turns the ball over. So maybe Oregon's just conservative, play great defense, and then just wear them down along the lines of scrimmage. Louisville is at Clemson. This game is 7:30 Eastern time on ESPN. Now, Clemson has won 6 straight games. They dropped their season opener against the Georgia Bulldogs. They're 4th in the FBS with 42 points per game this year. They've scored at least 40 points in 4 of their 5 ACC games. They've been dominant. But they haven't played a team yet, or they haven't beaten a team yet that has a record that is above 500. And I look at Louisville, and I think they're super talented. I think it's a very dangerous football team to mess around with. They got speed at wide receiver. They got speed at running back. They got a quarterback that's super accurate and tough. They're good along the defensive line. Now, Louisville is not a flawless football team. Their offensive line's got big challenges. and they're not great in the secondary. At least they haven't been this year. But Ja'Cory Brooks right now leads the ACC at wide receiver and is 8th in the FBS with nearly 800 receiving yards. He also has 8 touchdowns. So I think Ja'Cory Brooks, they're going to feature him in this offense, and he's going to get his. He has at least every year, and I think, or every game. And Jeff Brom, I think, does a great job of scheming wide receivers open. So Ja'Cory Brooks is going to get his. It's just, will the other guys be contained? That's a big question mark. Tyler Shuck has been awesome. I mean, he's taken a lot of hits too. He's taken a lot of, go look and see how many hits he took against Notre Dame. It was a lot, but he battled and he continued to fight and continued to give them a chance. Now, Cade Klubnik, on the other hand, he's got to be one of the most improved players in the country this year. Now, Louisville's secondary is pretty average, like I said, especially on the downfield throws. So if Clemson can block them, they should be in pretty good shape. The problem is Clemson's defensive line has not been as good either. So can they get pressure on Tyler Shuck? So this will be kind of an interesting game. I think Louisville's going to make it really interesting, by the way. I think 11 points is too many. And I think there's going to be a lot of points scored in this game. I expect this to be a high-scoring affair because I'm not really sold on either defense, but I think both offenses are really capable of making things extremely difficult. All right, a couple giant killers. By the way, in case you're keeping track, I think I took every underdog. By the way, I did not pick A&M and South Carolina because I'm calling that game. But across the board, I just have this strange sense that this weekend's going to provide a little bit of drama. So if you are the type that's looking to find some edges and some value, feels like the underdog seems to be the right side heading into most of the games this weekend. I will give you some giant killers. There's not as many giant killers where you can just outright predict an upset. Like I said, I like Ole Miss in the game, but Arkansas is in giant killer mode, 100%. Vanderbilt is on the road at Auburn. Jerry Kill, Tim Beck, and Diego Pavia have beaten Hugh Freeze 2 years in a row, at Liberty in 22 and at Auburn last year when they were all at New Mexico State. Now they're at Vandy and they travel to Jordan-Hare. I think Diego Pavia and company make it really interesting. Another giant killer, and this one sounds so crazy to me, but why is Florida State only a 2.5 point underdog at home? Like, North Carolina's coming off a great performance. Like, North Carolina just flexed. Like, North Carolina should be favored by a touchdown or more, and yet they're not. Do I dare take the Seminoles here? I do. They are a giant killer this week, even though I guess if you want to qualify them as a giant killer, I guess that would require North Carolina being a giant, but I digress. So those are your three: Arkansas, Vandy, and then I'm rolling with the Seminoles for, I think, the first time this season. Hey, thanks for being here. We really appreciate you. We love you guys. We appreciate y'all's support of the show. If you could, for those of you that are new, if you could just subscribe to the podcast wherever you get the podcast. If you could go ahead and rate the podcast wherever it is you get them, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcast, rate. If you want to leave a review, that's awesome as well. We really appreciate it. But just as long as you subscribe, there's not some mailing list or anything. Like, you're not going to get anything. It's free. Like, just subscribe so that you can get the next episode every single time you log on to your podcast site. And then if you're here with us via the ESPN YouTube channel, hit that thumbs up and subscribe to the ESPN College Football YouTube page. So we appreciate you guys very much. It's always great to talk about these games. We hope you enjoy them as much as we will. We'll be back with you on Sunday to give you our breakdown of what went down here in Week 10. So for all of us here at Always College Football, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.